Argent range shimmered in the morning heat. The desert light hung low and white over the flight line, where cables curled like sun-warmed vines across the concrete. Power trailers hummed behind blast fences. The air itself looked fractured, stretched thin by the sharp scent of jet fuel and heat distortion. A line of high-gain antennas clicked into new positions, tracking invisible arcs across the sky as the simulation window opened on the ops board. At 100.0 hours, Trident Scope 14 entered its first combat rotation. Kesha sat near the back wall of the operations trailer, where the light from her monitor barely reached her face. Her gloves were looped neatly through her belt, untouched since sunrise. Her headset was slung behind her neck, not on her ears. Because no one had given her a voice channel, she was marked as auxiliary. Her job, officially, was thermal data support, not mission planning, not flight control, just logging. She was the one who watched what others forgot to see. Outside the trailer, laughter bounced down the hardpan between the parked hangar blocks. A group of pilots moved in a loose formation across the concrete, helmets swinging in their grip. Logan walked at the center, one hand shielding his eyes from the glare. He wore the kind of grin that carried through glass. His flight suit looked new. His steps didn't break pace as he turned briefly toward the ops van and nodded sideways at someone inside. "I swear, if I don't get the top sim score this run, I'll buy lunch for the whole wing," he said. "Reaper support or not. This one's already dead." Another pilot nudged him. "You're flying against AI. The drone's just watching." "Exactly," Logan said, flashing a quick smile. "Let the systems do the work." From inside the trailer, the words reached Kesha as a thin echo through the sealed door. She didn't react. Her eyes were on the second monitor to her left, where the Reaper's passive thermal overlay ran in pale blue. The drone was already airborne, high above the designated exercise corridor. But its camera feed was routed to a lower priority screen. The primary display belonged to Logan's F-22 feed, where his simulated ordnance list ticked down as the countdown for his strike window approached. No one else in the trailer glanced at the thermal screen. Kesha adjusted the contrast level by one increment and squinted slightly. The simulated convoy below the target cluster moved along its scripted path, but something sat oddly in the rear formation. One of the box trucks gave off a delayed heat trail. Not cold exactly, but wrong. Lagging. Too consistent. It didn't flicker the way an engine should. She tapped the corner of her keyboard and brought up a comparative map from the sim's first dry run. The anomaly was new. She reached for the coffee-stained log sheet clipped to the side of her terminal. A faint pink ring marked where someone else's cup had left a print near her initials. She'd flagged 2 patterns earlier that week, but no one followed up. She was considered accurate. Just not essential. Kesha typed a brief notation into the shared log. Convoy formation shows one thermal echo inconsistent with engine dynamics. Possible passive camouflage or erroneous AI label. Request secondary verification. She clicked submit. The request bounced once, then grayed out. No notification. No response. The room was louder now. A tech clicked through a targeting chart. Someone behind her tapped a stylus against a metal edge. "Any updates on anomaly tracking?" asked a voice toward the front. Another replied. "Nothing, Liv. Reaper's clean. Just watching." Kesha kept her eyes on the screen. The strange signature didn't move like a decoy. It pulsed wrong. Not as a steady burn, but in deliberate modulation. Like a delayed mimicry of expected heat. She narrowed her eyes and leaned in. The targeting AI hadn't flagged it, which meant the system considered it part of the environmental background. If it was a trap target, it was a good one. Across the top of the Reaper feed, the designation light remained dim. No lock. No paint request. Just passive scan. She tapped another key and overlaid the radar echo. It was soft, barely present, but it matched a pattern she remembered from a late-night archive in the Gulf test set. The signature back then had been buried beneath storm distortion. This one wasn't. This one was active and ignored. Behind her, the main screen lit up. Logan's F-22 moved into final intercept position. His voice, smooth and cheerful, came through on the room's master channel. Target visual confirmed. I've got a clean box. Rolling in. Copy that. Someone answered, checking a box off on their tablet. Weapon sim active. You're good for drop. Kesha opened her mouth, then stopped. She glanced again at the log window. Her note sat unopened. No indicator. No timestamp acknowledgement. Just a gray entry block marked with her name. She reached for the headset, paused, then let her hand fall. Her clearance didn't allow voice transmission, just logs. She turned back to the screen and focused on the anomaly. Still there. Still outside of designation range. Still moving just slightly wrong. Let the systems do the work, someone muttered nearby, probably in response to Logan's trajectory update. Kesha exhaled once. Her finger hovered over the keyboard, then shifted toward the manual sensor request field. She didn't have override. Not officially. The Reaper's designator was in passive. She wasn't cleared to touch it. She wasn't supposed to ask for anything once the sim was locked. And still, she watched. She didn't blink. Not when Logan rolled into strike angle. Not when the green box on the decoy pulsed to signal target lock. Not when the F-22 began its dive. The real target, if it was real, sat 2 vehicles back, still wearing that mirrored thermal skin that made it almost, but not quite, invisible. She moved her hand away from the override field. There was no place left to send the alert. No one would answer. She tapped the corner of the thermal map with one nail, then folded the coffee-stained log sheet in half and tucked it under her keyboard. The drone hovered at 60,000 feet. The Reaper didn't speak, but its feed kept watching. So did she. The control trailer smelled faintly of ozone and heated plastic, the kind of scent that clung to electronics working overtime. Fans hummed behind every panel. Display lights blinked in regular cadence. The air conditioner pushed against the desert heat, but it couldn't mute the sharpness of tension that had begun to build beneath the surface noise. At first glance, the room looked focused. Analysts gathered near the main terminal, their eyes locked onto the F-22's telemetry feed. But it wasn't discipline. It was performance. Everyone was waiting to watch Logan dominate. Kesha sat where she always did, in the last chair of the back row. Her monitor ran a half-second behind the others. Not enough to be disqualifying, just enough to feel wrong. The Reaper's feed in front of her showed a wide, desaturated image of the desert surface, digitally enhanced and overlaid with pale blue targeting boxes. Every 10 seconds, the drone adjusted its pitch to compensate for high-altitude wind drift, and the image gently swayed, like a camera on a pendulum. The simulated convoy remained at the center of the screen, still moving, still marked clean. The room around her carried an easy arrogance. One technician had kicked off his boots and was leaning against the wall with a protein bar in one hand, tablet in the other. Another flicked through comms logs with one earbud in and the other dangling near his collar. They all had something to do, but no one was watching the Reaper feed. That part was automated. Her part was a formality. Reaper looks like it's cruising, someone said near the main screen. No secondary angle. Negative. Not in this run. Another replied. Sensors slave to the F-22. Kesha didn't speak. She didn't move. But her eyes narrowed as she increased the contrast on her screen again. In the middle of the simulated convoy, one of the trucks had begun to flicker in a way she didn't like. It wasn't malfunction. The distortion was subtle, like a smudged lens on only one vehicle. The thermal bleed didn't pulse correctly. She toggled through the previous frame, then back. Same issue. She logged a soft tag on the anomaly non-invasive, internal only, and flagged it in the session log. The AI didn't register the shift. Her note was appended to a system log buried 3 clicks deep from the surface interface. It would take intention to find it. Hey, she said, voice quiet. Is anyone tracking the thermal variance on Vehicle 7? It's drifting. The closest person to her turned slightly, eyes half-lidded. He frowned like he hadn't heard the question clearly. She repeated it. Vehicle 7. Rear third of the convoy. There's a distortion signature that doesn't line up with sim specs. AI hasn't flagged it, he said, and turned back around. Don't interrupt active flow. Kesha looked down at her keyboard. The cursor in her secondary panel blinked in soft green. The gimbal control was locked. She didn't have manual access to the Reaper's sensor suite. That was above her grade. She was thermal support, not flight command. On the main monitor, Logan's voice came through again, crackling with playful arrogance. I'm seeing the decoy line now. No spread in heat band. This one's already done. Someone in the front gave a low chuckle. That's what they get for scripting it like a playbook. He's going to mark it on first pass. Kesha minimized the Reaper overlay and reloaded the raw IR stream. The suspect truck glowed slightly, but not in sync with the others. Its heat was uniform, unnatural, like a mask. The camouflage was too perfect. Engine noise didn't behave that way. She pulled up the calibration logs, but by the time she did, the drone had already passed that section of sky. Laser guidance had initialized. The auto-designate box pulsed red across the center of the feed. The AI had confirmed Logan's target as clean, matching profile, and within simulated clearance to strike. From a system perspective, it was textbook. Kesha watched as the box held steady, locked on a truck that reflected a perfectly consistent signature. That was the problem. It was too good. Her hand drifted toward the corner of the console, where a thin plastic switch covered the manual command input. She didn't lift it. She wasn't supposed to. It wouldn't grant her override anyway. But her fingers paused just short of touching the edge. Behind her, the countdown had begun. "Ordnance loaded," came a voice from comms. 15 seconds, said another. Logan's feed showed a clean dive angle. Weapon simulator locked. Guidance accepting AI paint. There was nothing unusual on the HUD. Except there was... Kesha watched the truck in the rear formation again. This time, the flicker was sharper. For half a frame, it blinked colder than ambient. That should have been impossible. She leaned closer. The temperature dropped in a step pattern, then jumped back. Not a sensor error, a reflection. She adjusted the feed contrast again. The AI logic didn't care. It still held the original decoy and center box. Kesha stared at the blinking red indicator that said, "Designator confirmed." She opened the gimbal path tab. Locked. No access. 5 seconds, came the countdown. No one in the room noticed her. A few were watching Logan's trajectory. The rest were logging timecode tags. Kesha remained in the back, the screen's blue light casting soft edges across her flight suit. She reached forward and hovered her finger over the command line again. The cursor blinked. The system prompt waited. A truck's heat signature was not supposed to drop. Ever. Not under load. Not in forward motion. Kesha didn't blink. Outside the trailer, the desert shimmered against the sky. The Reaper held its altitude. No one looked in her direction. No one asked what she saw. The laser box held steady on the wrong target. And Kesha, sitting alone at the last console in the row, kept watching. The room was counting down. Somewhere near the front, a comms tech tapped her finger against a clipboard, ticking off simulated ordnance procedures in sync with the display. A low murmur ran through the group, voices barely hushed, full of casual confidence. The F-22's HUD readout floated on the main screen with neat digital edges, showing Logan locked on target. The strike was seconds away. In the back row, Kesha leaned in, her eyes never leaving the Reaper feed. The drone's camera floated high over the simulated convoy, and the display shimmered with pale overlays. A line of blue boxes danced gently as the sensor panned across uneven terrain, following the automated path. It was beautiful in its sterility, almost hypnotic. Everything looked correct. Too correct. The AI had locked onto the decoy without resistance. But the rear vehicle, the one with the cold flicker, still sat unmarked, hiding in plain sight. The cursor on her console blinked again. Manual input was still locked, covered by a soft barrier of authorization code she wasn't cleared to breach. She stared at it. Her own name was already partially filled in at the corner of the override form. A passive remnant of her system login. The space beside it waited for a command string. Outside, the wind slid across the desert like a whisper. The Reaper held altitude, watching, silent and ready. Kesha's screen displayed its heartbeat, smooth telemetry, and soft pulses, a rhythm no one else in the trailer noticed. She flicked up the control guard and typed a code. There was no sound, no alert, no voice rising in shock. Just a moment of absolute stillness where a blinking cursor vanished and a new window opened. The Reaper's gimbal, previously locked in passive support, shifted from automatic to manual. The drone responded instantly, swinging a few degrees to the left. Kesha guided the crosshair across the terrain. The image blurred slightly as the optics reoriented. A dust trail lifted from the far edge of the simulated road. The anomaly pulsed once, faint, but clear. The thermal echo lagged behind the visual again. She adjusted the contrast and slid the box over it. Her hand didn't shake. The targeting square turned amber, then green. Target confirmed. Manual designation active. No one turned to look. The room stayed focused on the F-22's run. Logan's HUD mirrored the new data feed within 2 seconds. He didn't question it. From his perspective, the AI had simply refined the target mid-flight, responding to real-time telemetry like it always did. Box is still green, Logan said over comms, voice smooth and sure. Looks like the system caught it. Adjusting vector now. Time to splash. He didn't know. Not yet. Kesha kept one hand on the sensor pad and the other near the keyboard. She watched the Reaper's reticle track the target with surgical steadiness. The camouflaged vehicle, barely distinguishable from the terrain, glowed faintly inside the pulse. The AI never would have picked it. It wasn't meant to. The simulated missile fired. On the HUD, the feed played out like every successful strike. Clean vector, zero deviation. The decoy truck faded from focus. The camera chased the new target, hitting just behind its rear wheel. A red flash signaled a direct hit. Inside the trailer, someone let out a quiet cheer. A pair of instructors nodded at each other. Another analyst marked a check beside Logan's name on the scoring board. Textbook, someone said, system nailed the shift just in time. Logan's voice came through again, casual and pleased. Told you, one pass. That's all it takes. Kesha said nothing. The override window closed itself. Her manual designation faded from the Reaper feed. The gimbal swung back into AI control. The cursor returned to its default rhythm. Her name no longer showed on the screen. The only record of her input was buried in a command log that no one was looking at. The control room moved on. A new SIM profile loaded. Another pilot's name appeared on the roster. The conversation shifted toward debrief prep and lunch rotations. Someone cracked open a can of soda. Another wandered outside, stretching under the sunlit awning. Kesha sat in her chair, unmoving. The Reaper hovered high above the range, indifferent and invisible. It had followed orders. Then, it had followed her. Now, it waited. The laser system cooling down. The feed returning to passive. She pulled up the session summary and skimmed the metadata. Her override sat in the margin, logged and time-stamped, marked in pale gray. Operator ID Kesha. Status manual input confirmed. Time of designation. T-4 seconds. That was all. No one looked over her shoulder. No one asked what she'd done. Her monitor glowed softly in the half-shadow at the back of the room, the same color it had been at the start of the drill. Nothing about her posture had changed. Her gloves still hung from her belt, untouched. On the far screen, Logan's simulated strike was already being loaded into the playback queue. The analysts were tagging frames for training material, highlighting the curve of his approach, the speed of acquisition, the sharp vector into the final pass. Kesha didn't watch that screen. She opened a new document in her log sheet and began recording frame differentials from the post-strike thermal trail. Her breath stayed slow. Her hands stayed steady. The drone returned to its orbit. Outside, the sun lifted higher. The air trembled with engine heat and wind. Inside the trailer, the strike was already being called a success. The pilot would get the credit, the system would get the praise, and the image, the real one, the flicker that no one else saw, would vanish as quietly as it had appeared. Kesha leaned back slightly, her reflection faint in the monitor. Her ID badge caught the edge of the screen, mirrored for a moment in the corner. She tapped the keyboard once, the document saved. No one clapped, no one spoke her name. But the strike had landed where it was supposed to, and she had put it there. The after-action room was colder than the rest of the compound. Rows of monitors lined the walls, their glow softened by layers of glass and the haze of recycled air. It was a room built for evaluation, not conversation. The chairs were hard. The lighting never flickered. This was where mistakes were replayed, where decisions were reduced to time-stamped frames and color-coded impact scores. The room wasn't full, but the right people were there. Logan sat in the center of the second row, his flight suit still zipped to the collar, though the edge of his helmet hair showed through his temples. A comms lead sat 2 seats over, chewing a pen cap. Across the aisle, a pair of instructors leaned toward the front console, murmuring over a shared tablet. The playback was already rolling. On the main screen, the simulated strike played in 3 windows. One showed the F-22's cockpit feed, another displayed the Reaper's thermal overlay, and the third tracked real-time telemetry from both systems in synchronized alignment. The missile sim sequence had been tagged as a training highlight. It showed a smooth approach, quick target confirmation, clean acquisition, and impact at the exact designated frame. One of the instructors nodded. Perfect box behavior. The AI painted the decoy early but corrected at the last second. No pilot correction needed. Just let it ride. Logan leaned back in his chair. Told you. The paint was so smooth it felt scripted. I barely even blinked. That system's getting smarter. No one disagreed. At the front of the room, Dana, the command instructor, scrolled through a debrief checklist on a secondary screen. She ticked off procedural items in a low voice, barely looking up. She had already watched 3 other strike reviews that morning. Most of them were clean. This one, however, was being considered for simulation doctrine. The system correction had seemed sharp enough to suggest a machine learning refinement under pressure. It was worth noting. A junior analyst named Reed, who had transferred in 2 months ago, sat in the far corner with a split display window. His job was to timestamp metadata irregularities, usually just to confirm that sync offsets were within tolerance. He wasn't expected to say anything. But Reed didn't click to the next tag. He squinted. The Reaper's gimbal shift was smooth, too smooth. It didn't show the telltale delay that usually accompanied AI pattern recognition. In fact, the target slewed early, almost manually. He pulled up the source logs, frowning slightly. The override flag blinked once, almost hidden in a sea of background code. Wait, Reed said, mostly to himself. There's a manual input here. No one turned right away. Dana didn't hear him. Reed leaned forward. The Reaper's laser box wasn't updated by the system. It was slewed, manually. Someone shifted the target off the decoy before the AI called for a reroute. Dana looked over her shoulder. That's not possible. Passive lock was enabled. Who had flight control? No one, Reed said. That's the thing. There's no authorization tag for override in the live stack, but the metadata log has a command entry. The screen updated. A single line of operator code sat beneath the moment of target transition. Just above the confirm pulse, one name appeared. Operator ID Kesha. Status manual input confirmed. There was a pause. Not long. Just enough for breath to shift in the room. Then Dana stood up. Replay the override moment. Slow speed. Full telemetry sync. The main screen flickered back. The Reaper's gimbal box, previously centered on the system-approved decoy, shifted slightly left. The slewing curve was tight and intentional. The crosshair hovered for 1 second, then locked. Confirm box turned green. Target marked. Missile released. Logan was no longer leaning back in his chair. He watched the screen with narrowed eyes, jaw tight. You're saying that was her? Kesha did that. Dana said nothing. She didn't need to. The override code was still there. It hadn't been scrubbed. It had just gone unnoticed. Another instructor spoke quietly. That signature wasn't in the AI pattern library. We thought the system refined it mid-run, but it didn't. She found it. Logan looked down at his hands, then back at the screen. The moment replayed again. His own voice filled the speakers, confident and clean. Box is still green. Looks like the system caught it. Adjusting vector now. He said nothing else. Reed rechecked the logs, scrolling through every call in the active session. No one else had touched the Reaper during that window. The AI had not updated its decision. The only person who saw the real target was the one not in the room. Dana exhaled once, quiet and slow. She wasn't even cleared for manual access. That panel was supposed to be locked. It was, Reed said. She unlocked it anyway. The room went silent. No one made a joke. No one tried to minimize what had happened. The image on screen, a single green box resting on a hidden target, held steady as the playback looped. The Reaper hovered at 60,000 feet, motionless above the desert. The F-22 flew its pass. The strike landed, and the name beneath the box stayed the same. Operator ID Kesha. Logan shifted in his seat. His earlier confidence was gone. He didn't look angry. He looked small. He looked like someone who had flown through a perfect mission without ever knowing who had kept it from failing. Reed minimized the log and sat back. I think she saved the drill score. That strike would have failed without her redirect. The decoy would have been marked a false positive. Dana folded her arms, and she didn't say a word about it. The room remained still. Outside, another sim rotation had begun. New jets lifted into the sky. New profiles loaded. But here, inside the after-action chamber, nothing moved except the cursor blinking on the override line. Kesha had never entered the room. She had made no statement. She had offered no defense, no claim, no protest. She had just seen what no one else had, and acted. Quietly, cleanly, without permission. And now her name lived in the log that no one could erase. Morning settled over Argent Range in shades of pale gold, the sun rising clean through a windless sky. The heat had not yet turned sharp, but the concrete already glimmered. A single line of footprints crossed the edge of the tarmac, where Kesha walked alone. Just inside the red safety border, but far enough out that no one had to step around her. Her boots made no sound beneath the drone of power units and ventilation fans. She moved with the same calm rhythm she always did. Nothing in her posture announced what had changed. Ahead of her, 2 F-22s idled in prep lanes, their wings throwing long shadows toward the flight line. Crew members darted between fuel trucks and comm towers. Someone called for a checklist confirmation over the intercom. Kesha passed them all without drawing a glance. Logan came around the corner of the equipment trailer just as she stepped into the open space near the morning brief tent. He wasn't wearing his helmet this time. His flight suit was zipped down at the collar, gloves folded under his arm. He caught sight of her and paused for just a second. He didn't smile. He didn't nod with bravado or speak with practiced charm. He didn't make a joke. Instead, he looked at her the way people do when they've been handed a truth that won't leave their mind. Not shame, not apology, just awareness. He held her gaze for a single breath. Then he kept walking. Kesha said nothing. The entrance to the command trailer was propped open with a metal wheel chock. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and old paper. The walls were lined with fold-out tables, whiteboards, and neatly stacked binders. No one raised their voice. A few officers stood clustered around a laptop, heads bowed, muttering over protocol language. She stepped inside without announcement. No one stopped her. Dana, who had led the strike debrief the day before, stood at the far side of the trailer, tablet under one arm, her other hand flipping through a printout. She looked up as Kesha approached, then held out a clipboard. It bore no cover sheet. The top page was a revision draft. Thermal signature override procedure, manual input recognition addendum, confirmed use case operator ID Kesha. Dana didn't say her name. She didn't explain the change. She just handed it over and returned to her tablet. A moment later, she stepped away from the group and moved toward the comm station, not looking back. Kesha flipped through the packet with one hand. The language was clinical, written in the flat style of official technical amendments. At the bottom of page 2, in a margin near the revised flowchart, her override code was embedded beside a line of metadata. Operator log verified. Manual redirect confirmed. Timestamp 100.07. Trident scope 14. She folded the pages in half and slid them into the clipboard's sleeve. Her gloves still hung from her belt, untouched. She had never put them on. One of the officers at the center table noticed her, then looked away quickly. It was a small thing, shoulders tensing, eyes flicking back to a screen, but she saw it. Recognition, unspoken and unfinished. He had been one of the voices in the trailer during the strike, the ones who laughed when Logan called it easy. Another officer muttered something to a colleague about rerouting the next sim series to allow for manual paint windows. He used the term adaptive override. He didn't say who had made it possible. Kesha walked past the table and paused near the mounted thermal map at the rear of the room. It showed a full frame from the strike sim, frozen at the moment of designation. The laser path was highlighted in faint green. It bent slightly, not perfectly straight an angle that shouldn't have existed if the system had painted it alone. A signature only showed that curve when guided by hand. She stared at the map for a few seconds, then turned and walked back outside. The sun had climbed higher, casting sharper shadows. The second rotation of pilots was forming near the canopy line, where new briefings were being called out in crisp, even tones. Kesha crossed behind them without drawing attention. Her boots left narrow prints in the dust that settled just past the concrete edge. She passed the side of the Reaper trailer, where the window was still dark. The machine inside was quiet now, cooling, waiting. She returned to the bench near the auxiliary data tower, where her pack was still tucked beneath the bench rail. She sat, clipboard on her knees, and took out the thermal log from the day before. The coffee stain still marked the corner. Her handwritten note was faded at the edge. Convoy anomaly. Rear echo. Cold shift. She folded the page once, neatly, then again, and slipped it into a side pocket of her pack. No one stood near her. No one clapped. No one read a citation aloud. But the protocol had changed. She wasn't listed as a pilot. She wasn't marked as mission lead. Her name wasn't entered in any public scoring sheet. Still, the addendum existed. It lived in the official system documentation. The override procedure bore her name, and everyone who mattered had seen it. Logan passed her again 15 minutes later on his way back to the sim prep station. He glanced once in her direction but said nothing. This time, he didn't look away. Kesha didn't look up. She was already opening a new worksheet, a fresh grid, another pattern to watch. The rules had shifted. And now, the room moved differently around her, quietly, respectfully, like a system slowly learning what it had almost missed. The last of the sun was slipping past the edge of the trailer roof when Kesha keyed in for the evening diagnostics block. The trailer was quieter now than it had been all day. Most of the control teams had gone. The instructors were at dinner, and the analysts had transferred final telemetry to long-term storage. Only the low hum of idle systems remained, punctuated by the occasional soft click of a relay switch resetting itself. She didn't turn on the overhead lights. The glow from the monitors was enough. Her workstation blinked awake as soon as she sat down, greeting her with the default status screen and a line of green text across the bottom. User Kesha, Authorization Level Override Technician. She looked at the words, but didn't react to them. The title had been added to her ID that morning during the protocol update. It had changed the way the system greeted her, but not the way she moved. She rested her forearms on the edge of the console and watched the cursor pulse in the top field. The terminal waited. She tapped the log folder and pulled up the recorded sequence. Not the full mission, just the frame she had clipped during the debrief window. It loaded smoothly, no stutter, no delay. a fixed angle from the Reaper's gimbal view. The desert below painted in gradients of artificial blue and gray. At the center of the screen, the laser reticle began its shift. The box slid away from the decoy vehicle, tracing a slow arc to the left. It hovered, paused, then locked onto the target hiding in the rear. The green glow brightened at the edges. Her code activated. The confirm signal flashed once, then the feed went dark. She watched it play through a second time. Then she closed the window and let the screen go idle. Reaching down, she unzipped the side of her pack and pulled out the folded thermal log. The paper was soft at the creases, the corner still marked with that faint, circular coffee stain. Her handwriting was small but clear across the top margin. Rear echo. Cold shift. Logged. Ignored. Correct. She folded it a final time, tucking it into the back of the file tray under her desk. Not in the trash, not framed on the wall, just placed quietly into the archive. Beside her console sat a white paper cup, half full. It had gone cold sometime in the early afternoon. She hadn't touched it. She reached over now, lifted it, then set it down again. The sleeve left a faint mark on the table, almost identical to the one on her log sheet. She opened a new worksheet. The system auto-filled her ID at the top. The cursor blinked beneath it, ready for input. Kesha typed a line. Convoy Sim Variant 4, scheduled for update. Baseline thermal test calibration shows slight divergence in engine rhythm at -3% expected value. Suggests secondary review prior to next drill window. She saved the file and moved to the next one. The room stayed silent. No one would come in to shake her hand. No one would ask her to stand in front of a board or give a statement. There would be no certificate, no plaque, no line of pilots giving quiet thank yous on their way out. She didn't expect it. She didn't need it. The update to the protocol was already enough. Somewhere in the Sim Center's mainframe, the revised training documentation included her manual designation as a validated method. Her override had been processed, acknowledged, embedded, not as a headline, not as a story, as data. Her name sat next to the instruction as fact. A cooling drone doesn't need applause. It just needs confirmation that the command was received, that the target was correct, that the path was clean. Kesha leaned back slightly in her chair. Outside, the wind picked up for the first time in hours. It passed across the desert in a wide, low sigh, rattling the edge of the window frame. She could hear it better now that the hum of voices was gone. She looked up at the empty chairs behind her. All of them faced forward. None had ever turned toward her when the moment came. She had acted alone, in silence. That was how it had always been. The difference now was simple. The system had seen her. She closed the worksheet, powered down the auxiliary feed, and stood. Her gloves still hung at her hip. They were there if she ever needed them. She hadn't. Not for this. She tapped out her session and stepped outside, the trailer door clicking shut behind her. The sky above Argent Range was already turning dark, but the air still held a trace of heat. The quiet was complete now, the kind that felt like a held breath, the kind that followed something real. Kesha paused at the edge of the tarmac, hands still empty, eyes still calm. Then she walked on. Sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one no one notices. Kesha was overlooked, dismissed, and kept at the edge of every decision. But when it mattered, she saw what no one else did and acted without permission, praise, or fear. Her strength was not loud. It was quiet, precise, and rooted in knowing who she was long before anyone else recognized it. This was not about proving herself. It was about doing what was right, even when no one was watching. In a world that often rewards noise over clarity, Kesha reminded us that control does not need a spotlight. It only needs courage. If this story spoke to something inside you, share your thoughts below. And if you believe in the quiet kind of power, the kind that changes everything without asking for credit, follow along. There are more stories like this one, waiting to be heard.